You're staring at a CLAT legal reasoning passage. The facts are dense, the clock is ticking, and options feel equally plausible. In tort law, the plaintiff alleges a civil wrong, but the defendant's power lies in the general defense. Successfully proving one of these shields provides complete immunity from liability. Exam setters target the microscopic boundaries where one legal shield ends and another begins. Misidentifying a defense, like labeling an inevitable accident as an act of God, results in a lost mark and a negative grading penalty. To navigate these passages, you need a systematic way to map specific factual triggers to their exact legal outcomes. This method replaces guesswork with a series of conditional checks. It forces you to rely on the evidence provided in the text rather than an intuitive feeling. Mastering these specific thresholds allows you to accurately isolate the correct principle under exam pressure. Let's start with the first set of conditions. First, look at the plaintiff. Did they voluntarily agree to participate in an activity with known risks? This vintage race car on a steep track represents an inherently dangerous environment. If a spectator chooses to attend and is injured by debris from a standard crash, the law views that risk as accepted. When risk is known and accepted, the principle of valenti non fit injuria applies, and the defendant is shielded from liability. The validity of this shield depends entirely on the quality of that consent. If the agreement wasn't truly free, the protection fails. In an exam passage, search for specific invalidators. Was the plaintiff intoxicated, lacking mental capacity, or acting under physical force? If any of these factors exist in the fact pattern, the consent is legally flawed. The defendant remains exposed to full liability. Identifying these moments of coercion or impairment is the primary method for disqualifying the valenti defense. Next, evaluate the cause. Was the force behind the harm entirely natural? This is the requirement for vis majeur, or an act of God. It must be an extraordinary event with no human touch involved. In a legal context, a standard weather event isn't enough. It must be an unprecedented force that no reasonable person could have anticipated or prevented. If the passage mentions even a minor human oversight, like a poorly maintained drainage pipe that contributed to the flood damage, the act of God defense fails immediately. If human elements were present in the chain of events, we look toward a different shield. This is the inevitable accident. It applies when human action is involved, but the incident was unpreventable despite the defendant exercising the highest standard of ordinary care. Because this defense requires proving that no amount of reasonable precaution could have changed the outcome, it is exceptionally difficult to sustain in court. Proving that exhaustive level of care often fails under scrutiny, making courts highly skeptical of defendants who claim an accident was truly inevitable. If the exam pattern describes any human construction or intervention contributing to the loss, act of God is the wrong answer. Finally, consider the motive. Did the defendant act specifically to avoid a much greater harm? The necessity defense works like this scale. It justifies minor intentional damage, like breaking a lock, if that action stops a significantly larger disaster, like a gas leak. For the defense to hold, the harm prevented must mathematically and objectively outweigh the harm caused. Private defense is different. Here, the trigger is using force solely to protect your own body or property from an active, immediate threat. The primary constraint for private defense is the requirement of proportionality. If the response exceeds the level of the threat, like using a weapon against a non-violent trespasser, the shield is lost, and the defender is held liable for the excess force. Necessity centers on calculating public interest. Private defense centers on a measured response to personal danger. There is one scenario where every legal shield we've discussed is instantly stripped away. This legal reality emerged from massive industrial disasters that changed how Indian courts view corporate responsibility. Traditional British strict liability allowed too many exceptions to exploit. After large-scale tragedies, the Indian judiciary moved toward a harsher standard. To address the human cost of these events, the courts removed all traditional legal defenses for enterprises involved in hazardous work. M.C. Mehta was the driving force behind this doctrine. For CLAT aspirants, understanding his legacy is a requirement for decoding modern liability passages. This matrix shows the shift. Strict liability allowed defenses like act of God to escape liability. Under absolute liability, every exception is gone. Liability is total and inescapable. This rule triggers if the enterprise is engaged in hazardous activities. If met, no defense applies. In these cases, avoid criminal law arguments. Claiming a mistake or a lack of intent, mens rea, has no impact on a civil ruling for absolute liability. When you read the passage, identify the type of activity first. Map the actors and their actions against these specific legal requirements. Succeeding on the CLAT requires looking beyond what happened to identify who is acting and what they are managing. That is how you determine when a shield stands and when it shatters.